watching NotesIn9.
Hello, and welcome to NotesIn9. I'm David Leedy. Episode 101, Jailbreaking Xpages View Columns. Free your view controls. Alright, just a couple quick things before we get on with the show. My last show, episode 100, was actually a long version of my session from IBM Connect. It's called Xpages Development Modernize Yourself. There's a lot of different pieces in there, and I know it was a long show. I think it came in at like 80 minutes. So what I might do is I might extract a piece or two, a segment or two of that, and release them as like a little highlight in the future, in case you don't want to sit through the whole thing. There's just one or two sections I think that are rather important, especially about the community stuff. So if you might see that, so it might be kind of a if you just actually sat through the whole session, it might be a repeat. It might not, but you look for that to come hopefully sometime soon. I did another session with Kathy Brown, Xpages No Experience Needed. That was a show and tell, so that's another long one. It's still my intention to turn that into a video. I'm trying to test a way to do that with Kathy at the same time, and then there's scheduling. And if that doesn't work out, then I might just try to do it myself and just give her credit every other slide, because she did a lot of the work. But again, I know we said it in the session, and I still intend to get some kind of video on that as well. Finally, just a couple of thoughts on some Java stuff that's been going around. There was kind of this big debate on Twitter the other day, and some other stuff on where Xpages and Java fits. There's been some blog posts by Tim Tripkany and I guess some other guys and stuff like that. I would just reiterate my opinion is that you do not need to know Java to build Xpages applications. I haven't done any Java or much Java and any of the Notes9 stuff. A lot of people are not using Java, but my only opinion on the matter, and hopefully we'll have a little more discussion on this in the near future, is that Java is a good place for heavy business logic. So for instance, at work, I might have an object for trucks, and the truck has methods, and I might have an object for freight that goes on that truck, or I might have an object on the location of where these trucks go back and forth, and I put all my business logic in there, and that is without a doubt a much better way to put business logic than in just random server-side JavaScript functions. But you don't have to believe me, because there is a lot more Java coming to NotesIn9. There's a lot more non-Java, like today's show, coming to NotesIn9. But I just kind of wanted to get that out there, just to put on your radar. The key of all this Java crap is don't be afraid of it. It's worth learning. It's worth your while, and it's going to be my mission to prove that to you. That does not mean you have to use it. As my friend Paul Calhoun says, it's a tool in your toolbox. And if you don't have a tool, then you're going to use the tools that you do have. So if all you have is server-side JavaScript, that's the tool you're going to use. But for certain things, there might be a better tool out there, and it's worth your while to learn it, and it's not that difficult. But we'll see that, as I'm trying to plan some Java stuff now. So anyway, that's my little pre-show spiel. I am excited. There's no transition there, so I'm a little out of shape here in NotesIn9. I'm trying to get back into the habit, but I'm really excited about my new contributor, Brad Balassaitis, and I'm not sure if I pronounced that right or so. But Brad is a great developer. He's a great guy from PSC Solutions, or whatever the full name is. Kathy works. I mean, it's a huge Xpages team out there. Kathy's there, Marky Roden's there, Andrew Barrickman, who I'm trying to get on the show, is there, though he keeps running away. But maybe this will peer pressure him to actually suck it up and come on NotesIn9. He's a great developer. Troy Reamer is there, and probably some others that I've either forgotten or haven't even met yet. I think Will Howe. I think Will is there. There's just a lot of great talent at PSC, and Brad is one of them. And he's going to come on this show today and talk about basically kind of hacking your view columns and doing some interesting things with them that you can't just do. It's not a click, it's not a checkbox out of the box, but with just a little thought to it, you can basically add graphs to your view columns. You can add HTML to view columns. And I think this is a great demo. Brad really explains everything he's doing very well. I wish my demos were explained this well. So I don't have too much introduction here because Brad introduces himself. But with that being said, let's go to the demo.
Welcome to NotesIn9, Jailbreaking XPages View Columns. In this episode, I'm going to show you several ways that you can take control of the output of a view column in a standard XPages view panel. We can break it out of its box and add much more rich content to the display. My name is Brad Balassaitis. A little bit about me. I've been a Notes Domino developer for 17 years now, and I've been doing primarily XPages development for the past 3 years. I have the good fortune to work with the tremendous XPages team at PSC Group. I blog only about XPages at accelerant.wordpress.com, and you can also connect with me on Twitter and LinkedIn. So in this session, we're going to take a look at view panels. We'll look at the standard functionality for a view panel. What does it display in a column? We'll look at improving that by computing column values. We'll take a look at how you can pass HTML and JavaScript output through a view column to the browser. And then we'll take it a step further and show how to mix server-side and client-side JavaScript to generate even more customized output. And finally, we'll take a look at hijacking the view column altogether so that we have complete control over its output. And 2 demos I'll show there will be displaying an iframe within a view column and also rendering a dojo chart within each row of a view column. And that demo uses a custom control, so we'll also take a look at some concepts for using custom controls in XPages as well. The most important thing to remember about this episode is that this is not about developing a specific outcome. It's about providing concepts that you can use in a variety of different ways to meet whatever your requirements are so that you can customize your views and provide more rich content out of them. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the view panel out of the box is definitely not a very flashy tool, but it's a core control that's been there since day one, so it's always available. And it's a quick means of surfacing data from a view into XPages. So we're going to take a look at the default output and then start to customize it in several ways. Now first, I just want to mention that this test data that I'm working with is just a simple database with information about NFL football teams. Okay, it's a sport that I enjoy following, so we've got some data here about teams with the location, the conference, division, predicted wins and losses, and a link to the team's website. So that's the data we're working with. Here I've got a brand new blank X page, and we'll just drag and drop a view panel right onto it. I've only got this one view here, so we'll just select that. View panel is now added to my page, and I can preview it in the browser. And we can see that took seconds. I was able to quickly get this data, surface it in the browser, and it was very quick and easy to do. Now, this isn't anything fancy, but it definitely does the job. Problem is, by default, it's pretty limited. Right? We can see that the output here looks very similar to the output in a standard view, in a Notes client application. Straight tabular data, all same style, text, all of that. You can see by dragging and dropping, what it essentially did was map one column in the Notes client view to one column in this XPages view, right? It does the job, but there's nothing exciting about it. Problem is, when you're taking applications to the browser with XPages, your users and clients, they want to see more of the promise of XPages, the quote-unquote Web 2.0 functionality. What can we do to make it more modern? So to this end, and because I've been working with XPages for about 3 years now, I've spent a lot of time looking at ways to enhance the functionality of view panels. On my blog, you can find a series of blog posts that I've written about enhancing the panel's functionality as a whole, including building dynamic jump-to lists, field-specific searching, fixing category indenting. I've also written an article for The View about implementing editable columns in views, so you can look for that. That'll be out pretty soon. And today we're really going to focus on what we can do to customize the content within the view. Within these cells, each column that it's displaying, how can we take this further and really customize the output? So the first thing we're going to take a look at is just computing a column value. Let's see, if we look at the source for a column that was just dragged and dropped on here, we can see this parameter column name equals division, right, within the view column tag. That tells the page that it's trying to get information out of a column that's named division from the underlying view, right? So it's a straight one-to-one mapping. So the first way we can start to customize this, so I'm just going to right click on this column and append a new one. Now I've got a new blank column. If I go to the data tab under the properties, we can see that by default it wants to display a view column. But I also have this option to compute the view. So I want to create a computed value, but to get information off of the document, first I need to have a handle to the document. So before we can compute our value, we have to select the view panel itself, open up the properties, and under all properties and under data, we have this property called var. So in here I'm going to create a variable and I'm going to call it row handle. Now this is basically going to give me a handle to each entry in the view. It actually gives me an XSP view entry object that within each row of the view I can use to access information in that view entry. I can get a handle to the columns that are in that entry. I can get the node ID of the document. And if I need to, I can also use this object to get the backend document so that I can read more information off of it. So starting with this concept, what we're going to do is just customize our new view column to just display a combination of two other columns in the view. So I'm back to my new column on the data sub-tab of the properties, change this to computed value, and now I can write some server-side JavaScript to combine some column values. I'm just going to paste in a code snippet that I've got handy here. Now what this is going to do is it's going to use this row handle object that we just created as our handle to the view entry. It uses this method called getColumnValues. Now what this does is it returns a vector that includes all of the values for this entry in the view. So I can use that method and I can use a subscript to get a specific column value. Okay, so this may sound strange, it may look strange, but again, this method returns a vector, but I can subscript it to get the specific piece of information that I want. So I can save this, and I will display it in the browser. Okay, now we can see our new column here took the values of the third and fourth columns and just combined them together. Okay, nothing fancy there, but it really does open the door for you to start customizing your columns. Now, this is kind of like computing a column value in the Notes client, but there is a big difference. In the Notes client, you really only have access to the current document when you're computing values here. In XPages, I was just writing server-side JavaScript, so I can use that code. I can go look up something in a completely different database if I want to get information to display here in this column that I'm customizing. Okay, so that was the concept of customizing columns. Next thing we're going to take a look at is how to pass HTML and JavaScript through to the browser. Okay, so back to my demo view here. Now if we look at the source of this, we can see that there's no content type specified here in the view column. Okay, I'm going to remove this column and just add a new one, so we're starting fresh. If I go to the display sub-tab for this column, we have this property called content type, and I can change this to HTML. Now if I look in the source, I have a new attribute called content type equals HTML for this column. This is going to tell the view that it is not going to escape the content that comes out of here, just treat it as pure HTML. Now this kind of opens up the door for us to send some more rich content through. So just to show you how this will work, again, we're going to compute the value because we're not just reading it from a column directly underneath, and we've set the content type to HTML. Now I've got this little snippet here that just writes out an H1 tag, an I tag to basically write out some italicized H1 text. Okay, so we're computing this value and we're telling it it's HTML. And now if we go display this, we can see now I've got this pure HTML was passed through to the browser. Okay, now again, this by itself isn't terribly fancy, but it starts to open up another door for us for how to send some rich content through. So now, to take this a step further, let's change this to just send some JavaScript straight through. Okay, now so my column at this point will be writing out a script tag using the document.write method of the DOM and using a JavaScript date object. So it's just going to pass this straight through. As soon as it writes out, it's going to write the date out in the column. So we'll take a look at this in the browser, and now we're back to the standard format because I didn't add any formatting to it, but we've got this field that I wrote which just says date, and then it's got the date and time that came out of that JavaScript object. Okay, now it's all well and good, but we can keep making this more powerful if we start combining these concepts and adding something more to the mix. So the important thing to remember here is that we're using server-side JavaScript. So we can use that and we can start mixing in information that we get from back-end lookups into client-side code that we write out on the front end. So what I want to demo next is to write out a button into the view row, and the button is going to have an on-click event, and it's going to execute a JavaScript alert, but it's going to display the node ID of the document. So to make this happen, I need server-side JavaScript to get the node ID, I need client-side JavaScript to run the alert, I need some client-side or HTML to display the button. So once it starts getting more complicated, we're mixing more things here, I find it handy to kind of write out what the output needs to look like. Because now again, we're mixing several things here, and since I need to use server-side JavaScript, it's going to look like this, where I need to wrap the whole thing in quotes. And now I've got several levels of quotations in here, and it can get confusing, so I think it's handy to have this first line here as a reference for what's the goal for the output that I'm looking for. So you can see these statements look very similar, but since we got 3 levels deep with the quotes, I've had to escape the quotes within the alert box at the beginning and the end. This single quote after the node ID text kind of cuts off the whole statement because I'm using server-side JavaScript to get the node ID and return it. So you can see again we've got our row handle object that gives us the handle to the view entry, and it has a get node ID method. So I can, with that server-side JavaScript statement, get the node ID, pass it through to this client-side code that I'm writing out. So let's take a look at this. Now we've got a button in every row of the view, and when I click it, I get the node ID of that document. And you may not have much reason for doing something specific like this, but the concept can be very powerful. Here we're mixing client-side JavaScript, server-side JavaScript, HTML in different ways to start customizing this view column so that I have output that allows me to do a lot more than just displaying text that's underneath a view column. Now we're going to take a big leap beyond that and completely hijack the output of the view column to take full control over the content that's returned. And I kind of liken this to jailbreaking a phone because we're going to cut off the content that it wants to display by default and take complete control over it. So back to the column that we're looking at here. Remember, our standard column has this column name attribute that defines the column to display. If we look at the column that we were customizing, it doesn't have a column attribute, it has a xp this.value tag. Okay, so that defines the custom value that we're displaying here. Now I'm going to remove this column, and we're just going to add another blank one. Now to take control over the output here, all I really need to do is add this attribute value equals empty string into the view column header, and now it's not going to try to generate anything on its own. Now if I go here under the facets in the view column tag and before the closing view column tag, I can put anything I want in this space and it's going to render it in that area for the view column. Okay, so first I'm going to show how we can use just display an iframe in that column and have it display the value of the team website that's defined in the document. So we can see I just put an iframe tag right in here. I've specified a height and a width. Now with an iframe, the height is critical. If you don't define a specific height, it's not going to have any height and you won't see anything. So we've just defined a fixed height, and the key here is the source. Now I need to read this off the back-end document, but I want to show the concept for how this works. This is client-side code, okay? But fortunately we have this syntax here with the quote, pound, curly brace, JavaScript, colon, and then a closing curly brace and quote. What that says is that server-side JavaScript is coming up after this. It will be evaluated on the server, and whatever the value is, it will replace this whole string when it writes it out to the client. So if I paste this back in here, this return row handle dot get document, that gives me the handle to the document underneath the view entry, and then get item value string with the website, that's going to get the website value off of the document and return it here in the source. Now we can save this and go to display it in the browser. And now look at this. This is pretty ugly, but what we've got is each team's website displaying in an iframe right within a view column. You can see this, this really gives us a lot of control over what we're sticking in here. And look at that, the Redskins are offering cash back if you have to go watch that team. That's pretty interesting. But again, you're probably not going to have a need to put an iframe in a view column, but the concepts here should have a lot of use. This really opens up a door if you need to pass buttons through or any other custom HTML to do something within a view column. Now the last thing I want to show you is how we can actually take this a step further and render a dojo chart within each column of the view. As I showed you earlier on my forms, I've got two fields that track the predicted wins and losses for each team next season. So what I'm going to do is just create a little column chart that displays those values for each team. Now I'm using a custom control for this in order to just kind of streamline the code, make it more manageable. And for the sake of time, we'll just take a look at this custom control. I've already created it here. So the first thing that this custom control has is it defines the dojo module, dojox.charting.chart2d. Okay, the dojo libraries are all available on the server, but they're not all loaded. Only the ones that, the core ones are loaded by default. If you're using something extra like charting, you need to add it as a resource. Now the way I did that on the custom control, there's a resources subtab on properties. Under resources I click add dojo module and just type the name in there. But as you can see, I've already added it on this page. The next thing on this control is we have this div here that's called view chart, and really what this is the target for rendering the dojo chart. Okay, now if this was a single chart on a page, it would just be a regular div tag. I wouldn't need the XP div, but since I'm using this within a view panel, I'm going to have several instances of it. So I need to use an XP div tag so that it generates a unique ID for each instance so that I can render a chart in every row. Otherwise, what happens if it's not an XP div tag, I tested this and basically it only shows the div in the last row of the view because it can't display the same an element with the same ID multiple times on a page. So we've got our XP div here for the view chart. Next we have a script block, which is the code that generates the chart. What I really want to focus on here is the first few lines in here that are setting up these variables. Now the div ID, we need the target where the chart's going to get rendered. As I mentioned, up here I have my div, its ID is view chart. Now you see this syntax that it's using down here. this pound curly brace ID syntax, what this does is it, on the server side again, it computes what the actual XPage ID will be for that element, and it gives you back a client-side ID that you can reference. Now this is important because I'm in a view panel. This is going to be repeating, and it's going to generate a unique ID for every instance of the div. So what this chart will do, or what this syntax will do, is it'll return to me the unique ID of the div in the current row so that I can get a handle to it to write the chart out. Now, you might wonder how that's going to work properly when there's a bunch of instances of the view. The good news is that the variable resolver is just smart enough to know that it needs to get the closest one. So this kind of opens up the door for you to dynamically access different things within your row of the view panel. Same thing applies for working with a repeat control. It's a very similar concept. You can get a handle, with this ID syntax, you can just get a handle to the local closest copy of an instance of that object. Now the next two lines on here get our values for the wins and losses that we're actually going to chart. Now as you can see again, outside of the area that I've highlighted, we have this syntax with the quote, pound, curly brace, JavaScript, colon. And again, that's telling on the server side, evaluate whatever comes next and pass it through, as a value that can be accessed client side. And if you've used custom controls and custom properties, you're aware that when you have a custom property on a custom control, within that custom control in server-side JavaScript, you have an object called composite data that gives you a handle to all the property values that are passed to that control. So our control has properties for wins and losses, and this is how I get them and evaluate them into this client-side JavaScript function that's going to generate the dojo chart. So the rest of this code is very standard, dojo charting code. Line 25 here creates the charting object, and it starts with a handle to the div where it's going to render the chart, and that's why we needed to know what the ID would be. The next block defines it as a column chart. The next block sets up the y-axis, and it sets it, the range of the chart from 0 to 16. That's because an NFL season has 16 games, so that's our range of values. After that, we're adding an x-axis with labels W for wins and L for losses. And in this line here where it's adding the series, I'm passing in an array of values to put on the chart. And those are the values for wins and losses that were passed into the chart. Now finally, we have a dojo.addOnLoad call, and that actually calls it to render the chart. So this down here will actually call this function to write the chart out as soon as everything else on the page is ready. So next we just need to take a look at our properties and how we're getting these things. So for my custom control, there's this tab here under properties called property definition. And here's where I've defined a property for wins and a property for losses. So now what we need to do from our view column is pass values into those properties, and then this chart, this custom control will generate the chart. So back to our view here. I'm back in my brand new column. I'm in the blank space for the source. And what I need to do is display my chart. Now I could simply write this statement here to include the custom control, and then it'll be in the column. But look what happens by default. I have an error. And it says the prefix XC for element XC chart is not bound. Now if you go up to the top of an X page, every XP view tag defines namespaces for where it can find the tags that it needs to process everything on the page. There's nothing up here that defines the XC namespace. XP is default. You can see it's XP view panel, XP this facets, XP pager, but there's nothing in here that defines the XC tag namespace, and that's what it needs to handle a custom control. So if I remove this, the good news is if I just go to custom controls and drag this onto the page, first of all, you'll notice that it put the instance outside of the view panel tag. It's not expecting a custom control to be within a view column, so it doesn't allow me to drag and drop it there. But the important thing is that it automatically added this namespace for the XC controls. So now I can successfully use this chart. I'm just going to cut this and paste it back down into my view column where I need it. Let me save this. And now I've got two different errors. Now this goes back to the custom properties that we defined for the custom control. They're set as required because we need to know how many wins and losses there are in order to create a chart. So if I select the chart, go to its properties, and now I have the ability here to enter properties to pass in. Now I'm not just going to type a number in, I want to read it off the document. So I can click on this diamond, compute the value, and again I'm writing in server-side JavaScript, and I have a very similar statement to what we've had before. I'm using my row handle to get the current entry in the view. I'm using getDocument to get the backend document, and then getItemValueString to read the value of the losses field and then pass it into the control. Now we're going to do the same thing for the wins value. And now I can save this, and we are ready to take a look at it. Now look at that. We've actually rendered a dojo chart within every row of this view. And I know what you're thinking. Why are the Philadelphia Eagles only predicted to win 14 games next year? I know we all think they're going to be undefeated, but it's my theory that once they go 14-0 and clinch home field advantage throughout the playoffs, that they'll probably rest their starters and they might, lose it to a game at the end. Now, in all seriousness, I have no idea if you're ever going to need to display a dojo chart in a view panel. I've never had that need, but the important thing is that the concepts that we have now to work with really give us a lot of tools to kind of break out of the box of what we can display in our view panel. And there's a lot more than you could do. I mean, you're really only limited by your imagination. Some other examples that come to mind, you could add a Twitter stream, related to something in a document. You can write your own panel. You could have it bound to some data source that's completely unrelated to the document in the view. Chris Toohey has done demos of surfacing Google Maps within a view column. And Marky Roden has shown some great techniques for using jQuery in view panels. So the bottom line is you're not limited to the out-of-the-box functionality that you get with drag and dropping and then just getting a column-to-column mapping from the back to the front for what you display in X pages. You have a lot of flexibility, a lot of ways that you can customize the output. And I do want to mention that these concepts should all work very similarly within repeat controls if that's what you're using. The only difference is that, with a repeat control, you've already got complete control of your data. You don't have to hijack anything, so it's actually simpler. I wanted to demonstrate all of these things in the more restrictive environment of the view panel. So let me know what you come up with. I'd love to hear how you put all this to use. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
And that's the demo. If you have any questions, feel free to contact Brad. He's got a great blog as well that he's very active on. And if you have any questions for me, here's my contact information. And I thank you for your time.